All right, Mr. Koble back here again. Today we're going to talk about the Articles of Confederation, aka America's first mistake. So after the Revolutionary War is over, they need to decide on a government. They come together, they decide not on the Constitution, but on the Articles of Confederation. And it doesn't turn out as good as they were hoping. We're going to find out why. Before we start, just some quick note-taking advice. I'd strongly recommend writing down main ideas or concepts in a way that you understand. So use abbreviations, use analogies, use slang, whatever kind of shorthand helps you write in a way that you understand. Okay. So here's some basic vocab before we start. The first word we're going to talk about is tyranny. So this word gets thrown around a lot during this time. And a tyranny is a government where one person holds all the power. So king, dictator, emperor, Mr. Koble, that's kind of the basis behind tyranny. So one group or one person holding a lot, like all the power. Okay, the other kind of contrast to this is democracy, where government is a government based on leaders being elected by the people, or they're elected by representatives who are elected by the people. So this is like ASB would be an example. So we elect a representative from each grade who then argues on behalf of our entire grade with the school, or makes decisions based, representing their entire constituency, the people that voted for them. Okay, so some other quick words. One of them is ratify, top right. Ratify means to give formal approval and basically sign a treaty or document. So in this case, we're going to have most of the states had to ratify the Articles of Confederation, which means they had to give approval. They had to sign off and say, yes, this is an okay thing that we will abide by, that we will honor. And the last word, and this is going to be thrown around so much, is federal. Federal means it's the government that makes decisions for the whole country, not just the state. So federal decisions today happen in Washington, D.C. So issues that affect the whole country are federal decisions and happen in Congress, in the presidency, these kind of things. Think of like Washington, D.C. Now, that's different from states. State decisions only affect things that happen in that state. So for example, in California, decisions that affect only California occur in Sacramento, because Sacramento is our state capital. So when I showed you my ballot, I showed you U.S. House of Representatives, and you'd vote on someone. That person is a federal officer because that person goes to Washington, D.C. and votes on federal issues. That's different from, I think Chris Ward was like a state representative. So that state representative that was on my ballot goes up to Sacramento, and that state representative only votes on things that affect California. So that's the difference between federal and state. So I do this with my hands. If we were in real class, where I would go, and I'm gonna turn my video on, where I would say, okay, everyone say federal, and you go federal, and I'm like, now say state, and he goes state. So federal's the whole thing, state's just a piece. Anyway, those are your terms. If you need to rewind or go back, you can do that now. Okay, cool. So let's recap a little bit from where we left off. So colonists rebelled against the British because King George was acting like a tyrant. He had all the power. So when the colonists win, they're scared of government having too much power. It's a big deal. That's the entire reason they fought, was because they didn't like one person having too much power. They win the war. Thank you, France. Love you. Okay, now after the war. What happens after the war? You still have Native Americans fighting with the colonists, now Americans. A lot of them wanted the British to win the war. Loyalists, their biggest fear going into the war was like, oh man, if the Patriots win, we're going to have everything stolen from us. We're going to be tarred and feathered. We're going to be hung. We're going to be treated terribly. And all of that happens. And then the big one is the northern states, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, that kind of stuff, end up in a lot of debt because most of the fighting happened up there. So what now? Oh man, well, okay, that doesn't work, but you've seen the musical. What comes next? What happens now? What have we gotten ourselves into? So America has some really big questions to answer. And I hope these big questions don't eventually lead to a civil war because they can't agree on solutions to these questions. But that won't happen. That would be bad. Good thing a civil war will never happen. So 70 years later, a civil war happens, but we'll get into that later. The first big question they have to answer is how are we going to protect people's civil rights? How are we going to ensure that everyone in America has the rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, which they put in the Declaration of Independence? How are they going to guarantee that? The second huge question is what are we going to do about slavery? Because we fought this huge war and a lot of people died because we believe that people are inherently created equal by God and given God-given rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, yet we have slaves. What are we going to do about slavery? And this is a huge deal because a lot of people in the North, like Hamilton, wanted to get rid of slavery. But a lot of states in the South wouldn't join America if that was part of the deal. So it's a very big concern. Yeah, all men are created equal. Yeah, real. The third big question is how much power should a state have compared to the federal government? Basically, how many rights should states have? What is the extent of power for states' rights? What are states in charge of versus what is the federal government in charge of? And do they share power? Can a state do something the federal government doesn't want it to do? This is going to be a very hard unit. I'm just going to let you know right now. There's going to be a lot of these political terms thrown around. Okay. The fourth big question is, do we want a big central federal government with a lot of power, or do we want a smaller decentralized government where states have all the power? So basically, do we want a government do we want basically to replace the king with our own king, our own government that has all this power to be, to restrict people and have the possibility of, trampling people's rights? Or do we want a government where basically the states have all the power over their own people? It's a lot more decentralized. People have more control over their own government with states. And then lastly, how are we going to add new states? We start off with 13 colonies, but we know it gets up to 50. How are we going to add new states to this? And are those new states going to have slaves too? How are we going to decide that? So these are the 5 huge questions. I would strongly recommend you write all these down because we are going to be going back to these basically for the next month and a half. I won't say a month and a half. I would say the whole rest of the semester. These are kind of the 5 questions that we are going to be going back to all the time. So big, huge questions. Okay, if we were in class, I'd have you write a short paragraph about how America's experience as colonists may impact or affect their thoughts about these big questions. Maybe they don't want a huge government, they don't want to replace the king. They want to have a lot of state power. Maybe they want to get rid of slavery. Maybe they don't want to get rid of slavery. Who knows? But that's what I would have you do normally. But I'm going to keep going. So the solution to this, the Articles of Confederation, which look like this. And basically, long story short, 1781, this is America's first try. It is America's first document that sets up an attempt at government for the first 13 states, and it doesn't work. Here's why. When they were making the AOC, Articles of Confederation, they were afraid of the federal government having too much power. They just fought a king because the king had too much power, and they didn't want America to have its own replacement king. They really did not want the feds to have a lot of power. So they gave most of the power to the states, and they made the Articles of Confederation made the federal government weak on purpose. They did not want the federal government to be strong. So what they decided to do is they made one federal branch called the Congress. Today we have three federal branches, and we'll get into that later, but they only made one. So there is only one group to make all the whole country federal decisions. That's not the best. Sometimes you need one person in charge to make a decision and be a leader. Other times you need to split that power up. Who knows? We'll get to that. So we know we're going to get into all the bad things it did, but what good things did it do? As far as the good things it did, it is America's first attempt at creating some kind of national government. So there's that. There's a few land ordinances it sets up. It makes, so it basically sets up how they're going to move westward and occupy land in the West, how they're going to sell it, what cities are going to look like. They make free public school a huge part of America. This is like the only good thing it did. So it was cool because they basically took every single region and they divided it up into squares, which are then divided up into more squares. So it's just it's like a grid. It's very easy to understand. There's no like weird districts. Like it's very straightforward. Yada, yada, yada. The other huge thing they do is they abolish slavery in the Northwest area. So this is the time. So it's Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. Oh, yeah, no, the states that talk like this, yeah, no. Basically, if you follow football, this is the AFC and NFC North. So in the NFC North, there's no slavery. Congratulations. If you don't know football, I don't know, man. Figure out these 5 states. I have it right there. So these 5 states basically don't have slavery. Cool. So these are the good things about it. I guess how to divide land and no slavery in these states. And then what was bad about it? Literally everything else. The federal government has no power. They can't collect taxes from states. They can't raise an army. They can't enforce laws or make any decisions easily because there's no one person to sign off on things and say, yes, this is good, or no, this is bad. Instead, it's a group of only 13 people that keep fighting over everything. They also have no federal court system. So what this means, if there's no federal court system, then you are relying on state courts to decide everything. Here's the problem with that. If you have Georgia rule that court case A is legal, and you have Virginia and New Hampshire rule in the same court case that it is illegal, then you have widely different laws that have no jurisdiction. So for an example, let's say that, let's say it's about slavery. You'll have a whole bunch of different states make different rulings based on the same case. There is no consistent law, which is a big deal. So the states have way too much power here, and there's no national unity. It's more of just a collection of states. Actually, a lot of states had their own really weird trade laws, and a lot of states had their own kind of money. So if you were in business and you traded from, I don't know, Maryland to North Carolina, and North Carolina had a different type of money, you could not trade between Maryland and North Carolina. You could not go to another state in the same country and buy stuff because the currency was different. This would be like if every time you want to go to Arizona, you had to convert your money to pesos every single time. They wouldn't take the dollar, even though we're all in the United States. So very bad system because all the states have way too much power to do their own thing. There's no consistency. There's no glue to hold the country together. So it's like the kind of united-ish states of America during this time. Other bad things, and you don't need to write these down. Yeah, states had different trade laws, different types of money. They had different treaties with Native American groups. So some states would be at war with Native American groups. Other states would be chill, that are like next to them. So it really, it was very confusing. States could refuse to send soldiers for an army. So let's say California said, 10 years ago, no, we're not going to send any more soldiers to Afghanistan. You can get soldiers from other states. We're not going to do it anymore. It'd be pretty bad. So long story short, big idea, states did what they wanted, when they wanted, how they wanted, because they had almost all the power. If there's anything you need to write down, it's this part. This is the main idea of the Articles of Confederation. States had way too much power. I'll let you pause it and write that down if you need it. Okay, so why does this thing fall apart? Why does people say, okay, we're done with this? United States couldn't pay its taxes, and it couldn't collect it. Sorry, they couldn't collect taxes, and they can't pay off their war debt if they can't collect taxes. This is a huge deal. Federal government basically did not have the power to do this. A lot of states had, so that's a big deal. Another one was a lot of states had different laws. This would have been terrible in the long run. The nail in the coffin for the AOC is that in 1786, about a year, 2 years after this starts, you have something called Shays' Rebellion, which is a huge Massachusetts farmer revolt. And the United States did not have an army to put this rebellion down. They had to beg other states to send them soldiers. And it kind of proved that, feds had absolutely no power. So if there's anything you need to learn from this, it's that the founding fathers are afraid of giving power to the feds. The feds had no power to unify the country. And then this debate over a strong central federal government versus states' rights is still going on today. Maybe not in this election, because 2020 election is going to be a hot mess. But in like 2024, 2028, you'll see that states' rights is still going to be a huge center of contention. How much power should states have? Long story short, it fails. How can America balance not being a tyrant but also being a successful country that can pay off its debt? It's a huge balance that they have to find. So long story short, is this trash? Yes. Yes, it is. That's all for me. Have a good day.